My name is Marlene, and on behalf of the Huntsman Marine Science Centre, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that there is a reception afterwards, upstairs in Gallery 2. Tonight's presentation, Backyard Marine Biodiversity, is presented by Dr. J. Andrew Cooper.
Can you just put those spotlights on? And all right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Marlene, and thank you very much for the Huntsman for inviting me tonight. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and great to see so many people showing up. My name's Andrew Cooper. That's a picture of me. I was much younger then, a lot better looking. I'm a research scientist. I work for Fisheries and Oceans Canada at St. Andrews Biological Station. For those of you who aren't familiar with the biological station, we're neighbors with the Huntsman Marine Science Centre. We're just down the hill. We've been here for about 100 years, actually a little over 100 years now. And recently, for those of you who haven't been down there in the last little while, we've had some major investment in some new infrastructure, a multi-million-dollar new science building, and wet lab facilities, as well as a brand new Coast Guard vessel to support our science. So hopefully we'll be there for a little while longer to be able to use these new facilities. Tonight I'm going to speak to you about backyard marine biodiversity. And it's essentially taking the word biodiversity, which we all are familiar with in a global context, and bring those ideas to more local context in our own backyard. And what I mean by backyard are places like Passamaquoddy Bay and Bay of Fundy, and how important biodiversity is locally, globally, as well as locally. Tonight's lecture, it's going to take about, hopefully we'll go 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes if I spend a little more time with all these toys. I'm going to talk about what is biodiversity, why it's important, how we measure it. And then I'm going to go through a series of projects that I'm related with, that I'm working on, that are related to local biodiversity issues. And then I'm going to sort of try and incorporate a little bit of show and tell of all the fun toys that I get to take out of the field and get dirty, and sometimes break and sometimes lose. So really, what is biodiversity? I think it's a term that's overused. We see it, we hear it in the news all the time. We must conserve biodiversity. Biodiversity is important globally. It's what we need to sustain our planet. But we really don't sometimes we don't get a good sense of really what it means to us. And so I'm going to try to explain a little bit about what biodiversity means to me and put it in the context of the research that I'm doing. So biodiversity in the simplest sense is just the variety of life, with respect to genetic diversity, genetic variety, species variety, and habitat variety. What do I mean by each of these? So I'll try and provide a little bit of an example of what I mean by gene, species, and habitat. Well, genetic variety is probably easiest to recognize in things that we're familiar with. Despite our attempts here to disguise the difference in these siblings and first cousins, obviously these species are very familiar to us, so we can recognize clear differences in hair color, eye color, and behavior. For things that are probably not as familiar to us, it's a little more difficult to look at, to understand what genetic diversity is. But it's there just the same. And these three species of cod, you look really closely, the coloration is a little bit different. Me as a taxonomist, and I spent a lot of time identifying fish, I would spend time counting the number of fin rays, and dorsal fin rays, and caudal fin rays, and I would see some variation from species to species, or from individual to individual. And more importantly, the genetic variability would translate into differences in life history, differences in reproduction and behavior. So that's what I mean by genetic diversity. Species diversity is just an extension of genetic diversity. easily seen when we're looking at a number of species that are completely different. Things like lobsters and sculpins and herring. Not quite so obvious when we're looking at more closely related species, but again, we have these two flatfish, and in this sense, it's quite easy to detect the difference between the two. Anybody point out what kind of differences they see in the two? Non-fish taxonomists. Which way are the fins?
The fins.
The fins, the coloration of the fins?
Well, the placement of them.
The placement of them, yeah. Which way are they facing?
Well, they're towards the dorsal and...
That's a technical term. You got a ringer in the audience.
Yeah. Anyway, so one of the obvious differences here is just what you're trying to explain that, is that they're facing different ways. It's because their eyes are on different sides of their body. Right? So this species is left-eyed, and this species is right-eyed. Anyways, the species diversity essentially makes, as I said, it's an extension of genetic diversity. And species aren't able to reproduce. They're not able to produce wild life. Okay, so let's get on to habitats. Coastal habitat diversity, we can see this along the shoreline quite easily. We can see, within our own area, we see rocky areas. We can see tidal marshes. And all this is right in front of us. We can see this quite easily. The challenge with looking at habitat diversity in the marine environment is that a lot of it is underneath the water. All most of us ever see is just the water. We don't see what's underneath it. This is a typical example of what you would see at Tongue Shoal, which is just off St. Andrews. This is just a rocky shoal, but it's typically inhabited by inhabited by several species of algae and some crustaceans like this hermit crab. I like this picture in particular because it also illustrates another, little more complex idea about habitat diversity. And that's how one species can create habitat for another species. Here we have this hermit crab that's wearing a shell. It didn't make that shell. A whelk made that shell. Another species made that home for that hermit crab. And on top of that, literally on top of that, there's a little limpet living on top of that shell. So not only do we have one species making habitat for another species, we have one species making habitat for two different species. So this is what we're talking about, habitat diversity, as well as the value of species created habitat. Matt, do you have a question?
Yeah. Something I've always wondered, Andrew, is does the hermit crab kick the whelk out of the shell? Or do they pick it up because the apartment was vacated?
I personally haven't seen them take a whelk out of the shell. I've seen them take on larger, like move from larger empty shells. But I haven't actually seen that. I don't know the history of that. Thanks, Gary. Okay, let's move on. Also, habitat is not necessarily something that's natural. Unintentionally, humans unintentionally make habitat, and this is a good example of just how a discarded bottle, the St. Croix estuary. It's been there for a while. It's now it has coralline algae built up on top of it, and it's habitat for a little tunicate, a sea bass. And this concept will come into play when we talk about some of the research that we're doing in terms of how artificial habitats can also become habitats for a diversity of species. Why is biodiversity important? Well, just to make it really simple, when you look at the variety of genes, species, and habitats, this leads to resilience in the environment, sustainability in healthy environments, resilience to disease, and pests, resilience to changes in the environment like climate change, and resilience to sustained use like in our fisheries. Okay, let's talk just briefly about biodiversity in a global sense. How is biodiversity communicated? How is it communicated as important? Well, we all know about endangered species. And, they're beautiful and rare. rainforests and their function in terms of providing oxygen to the plant and also their diversity. As well as something like a tropical reef for its beauty, its species diversity, and its function in the ecosystem in terms of providing habitat for a number of species, as well as contributing to the nutrient cycling in the coastal environment. And always in the global context, we see in the news how that one rare species could be the next solution to some of our medical needs. But what about locally? What about in our own backyard? What kind of biodiversity is there and how is it important? Well, we think about Passamaquoddy Bay. It's known for its beauty, its tides, its fast-moving water. It has beautiful scenery, historic sites, and much of its coastline is beautiful and pristine. Underneath the water is just as interesting. There's a diversity of life underneath the water that most of us don't see. And these are just typical species that you would see anywhere in Passamaquoddy Bay. These sponges, these anemones, tunicates like the sea bays, and I forgot the name of that. Nudibranch, thank you. Things like this nudibranch. All these species have a role in the environment. They're all working to keep the water clean, establishing habitat, and providing and keeping the ecosystem open. We also have our fair share of rare species, like the right whale and charismatic megafauna. But what other things are in Passamaquoddy Bay that we value? Well, like any large body of water, transportation is extremely important to the economy, both for goods and for people to support trade. Fisheries have been here for decades. Fisheries like the herring fishery and the lobster fisheries have taken advantage of the abundance of species that are present in the environment. Herring and lobster probably being the most abundant. But fisheries also expand to take advantage of the diversity in this area as well. So we get fisheries that go after urchins for the roe, soft-shell clam in the shoreline, scallops, and even crabs. Other things of value in this area. Aquaculture has been here for over 30 years. Produces over $2 million annually in salmon. It too is actually looking to diversify and take advantage of aspects of biodiversity, not only to improve the resilience of its own products, but also with the hopes to increase resilience to disease, pests, and recycling of nutrients. So here we see two species that have been introduced into the aquaculture industry here. Blue mussel and...
What is it?
Pardon me?
Kelp.
The kelp. Tourism is also important in the area. A beautiful place like this is a wonderful place to relax and also just to enjoy a lot of the activities that are offered here, like sailing and whale watching. I think she's pretty happy to go whale watching. And obviously what we really, a lot of us really appreciate is the fact that the environment is clean and that it's available for us to use and our children to use and future generations to use. Okay, so let's get on to some more tangible things about biodiversity. How do we measure it?